everyone. First of all, it's very nice to see Enzel and Adrian and people I haven't seen for a long time, and you, of course, Robin. It's been years and years and years, so it's great to have you in the space with us again. And for everyone else, just welcome to this session of the Iscia seminar series on games and play. Today's presentation is titled Playing with Mom, Gender Performativity and Neoliberalism in African Comedy on Social Media. And it looks at how two popular male comedians, Chukwudike Akwudike, hopefully I pronounced that correctly, and Sonelo Moyo, use cross-dressing and mimicry to represent African motherhood and what this reveals about gender and youth experience in a neoliberal African context. This paper is presented by three scholars. So first we have Bimbo Lo, a research fellow in the Department of Journalism at Stellenbosch University, whose work focuses on media and gender construction, misinformation, and digital inclusion. Second, we have Nonhlanhla Ndlovu, a journalism and media studies lecturer at the National University of Science and Technology in Zimbabwe, and currently a research fellow at UNISA, whose research spans gender, humor, and youth engagement with digital media. And lastly, we have Dr. Robin Crigler, Assistant Professor of History at Glenville State University and a research associate with the African Biographies Project at the University of Johannesburg. And then his forthcoming book with UVA Press, Inevitable Satirists, Histories of South African Humour from 1910 to 1965, complements his ongoing work in stand-up comedy studies. So please join me in welcoming our three presenters, and we'll open the floor for questions and discussions after the presentation. So thanks very much. Go ahead, Robin.
All right. Well, thank you so much, folks. Unfortunately, I'm not sure whether Nonhlanhla and Bimbo are going to be joining us today. But let me say it's just an absolute privilege to get to present for a second time now at Iscia. Like Jenny said, I presented a long time ago when there was a power of humor theme to this. And that's sort of where we play as scholars. And so I just appreciate the welcome, and I appreciate seeing everyone here. So I'm going to be sharing my screen. Hopefully this will work. Let's see. Okay. I'm going to share this slide presentation here. Are we seeing it?
Not yet.
Okay. I'm not, it says I'm screen sharing.
It does, but we're seeing a blank.
Here we go.
There you go. There you go.
Is it there? All right. All right. Let's, let me, enter presentation mode. Where is the, oh, it's been a long time since I've used this.
Perhaps if you tap on that slideshow, yes.
Slideshow, is that how it does it? Okay, okay, wonderful. All right. So can you see it now? Oh.
I think you need to press Command Enter.
Command Enter. It says my screen sharing is paused, but I don't know how to unpause it.
Oh, goodness me. I think Zoom has changed its entire, what do you call it? It's updated, and that's made life very difficult for all of us.
Okay, I'm gonna try once again.
All right.
And then if it doesn't work, then we'll just continue.
Yeah, then just use it as it was.
Yeah. All right. I'm gonna try this. Okay. Okay, what are you seeing now?
We are seeing the view that you see with the slides down the side, and yeah, so you can try and press slideshow. See what happens.
Yeah, let's see if it does it now. Seems like, yeah, it's not really. I think I'm just going to do it from the window.
Okay.
Because you can see this content, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Well enough,
Okay.
yes.
Okay. So again, sorry about the delays here. Our presentation is called Playing with Mom, Gender Performativity and Neoliberalism in African Comedy on Social Media. And we are two scholars who both we both or we all sort of play in this space of an interest in social media. Actually, I became familiar with Nonhlanhla's work because we were both actually working on like pandemic humor in South Africa. And we wanted to do a project together. And at the time that we were sort of thinking about what to do, there was a trend on TikTok talking about African parents. And we were all kind of interested in this trend of sort of discourse and memes surrounding African parents, in particularly because it seemed like a very sort of transnational discourse. It was something that was bringing in people not only who were in Africa, but also in the diaspora, in the Caribbean, Africans living in the United States, but then also, what we would say African Americans. And so we settled on this question of thinking about mothers, and in particular, and trying to think about that in a more deep theoretical and also historical way. And so that is the inspiration for this chapter, which we've written for an anthology that is hopefully coming out soon, organized by some folks at Rhodes University. And so African motherhood is, and I'm trying to, I don't seem to be able to actually scroll or change the slides here. So I think actually I'm going to stop sharing my screen because I don't seem to be able to do anything with it. But African motherhood is a complex and contested concept. Scholars like Ife Amadume, Oiwumi Oiranke, and others have articulated the concept of motherhood in pre-colonial Africa as distinct from sort of patriarchal Western depictions of it. This idea of matripotency, this idea of motherhood as a powerful state of being rather than a submissive one or a subordinate one. But of course, motherhood was disrupted, and traditional ideas of motherhood were disrupted by colonialism and everything that happened in Africa in the late 19th and 20th centuries. If pre-colonial African societies were regulated by traditional institutions like extended families and religious codes and practices, post-colonial African societies, and particularly modern African societies, are distinguished by the perceived inability of both traditional institutions and the state to exert control over social conditions. The neoliberal contraction of African states, state-owned enterprises, and already fragile social safety nets have created a deep sense of precarity, particularly among African youth. In 2023, Nigeria ranked 172nd out of 183 in the Global Youth Development Index, and official data severely underestimate the real level of youth unemployment in the country. Meanwhile, in South Africa, and the two folks that we focus on, one is Nigerian and one is South African, the situation in South Africa is scarcely better. The world's highest level of income inequality and an official unemployment rate for youths aged 15 to 34 of 46.1% and rising. Over the same period, early 21st century, social media has rapidly increased Africans' exposure to the currents of international popular culture and the lifestyles of the rich and famous both at home and abroad. reminded constantly of lives they are not living, and increasingly unable to establish even a toehold in the world of formal employment. 59% of South Africa's unemployed youth report having no previous work experience at all, according to Stats South Africa 2025. It should come as little surprise that one, comedy on social media should be a popular way to unwind and commiserate about the challenges of life under neoliberalism, and two, that social media skits like those under study might be read as a symbolic dramatization of the predicament of African youths. So our paper focuses on representations of African motherhood through gender performances, particularly cross-dressing, because that's what both of the folks that we look at are famous for doing, in the work of two popular male comedians, Chukudikwe Demina Akudike, and I have to apologize because I work on South Africa. My Nigerian pronunciation is not where it should be. And Swanelo Moyo. So these are IMDK on social media, and then also Amozisi is Moyo's account. They were selected as case studies because their work centrally portrays the mother-child dynamic in a contemporary African home. And their substantial cross-platform followings facilitate a connection with a global audience. So Amozisi, the South African guy, has 6 million followers on TikTok, whereas IMDK has 9 million followers. So they also are quite prominent in terms of their reach. And they are obviously present on YouTube, on TikTok, on Facebook, and on Instagram. Though African motherhood is often represented as transnational and timeless, specific creative choices made by Aku, Dike, and Moyo serve to entangle their maternal characters within the dynamics of contemporary neoliberal African society as single mothers and members of a precarious middle class. To grasp the complexity of this representation in these skits, our research is guided by the following research questions. What are the representations of African motherhood in these skits? How do these performances highlight the influence of gender performativity and neoliberal imperatives on family dynamics? And then what types of conversations and interactions do these performances stimulate? Because this is social media, so all of this content comes with comment sections, and we all find the comments that people leave on these videos really interesting. So I want to talk a little bit, I don't want to spend too much time on sort of literature and stuff, but I think there's a lot of different kind of theoretical and conceptual things that we've introduced here, and I just want to spend a little bit of time on them. So first, this question of motherhood. You know, motherhood is a really complicated concept within feminist scholarship because, you know, frankly, sort of the family dynamic, particularly sort of the patriarchal global North family ideal, is one that comes under a lot of feminist critique. And so there's Jacqueline Koch calls motherhood, quote, probably the most contentious issue in feminist politics, unquote, due to its role in reinforcing the subordination of women. Whereas you have an alternative discourse, again, with these African writers like Oyironke Oyiwumi, who really distinguish African or indigenous concepts of motherhood from this, Western model. So as Oyiwumi puts it, speaking of Western Nigeria, quote, part of the Yoruba definition of motherhood was that mothers must provide for their children materially. Motherhood was an impetus rather than an obstacle to economic activities, which again is very different from sort of the nuclear family domesticity ideal that you encounter in a lot of kind of global North feminist discourse. I also want to talk about African humor traditions, because this is something that, with my training as a historian, I spend a lot of time thinking about there's been a lot of interest recently in the importance of humor in African life. But it's important to recognize that the interpretive lens and the way that humor has been understood within African societies has changed over time, particularly over the past 150 years. A lot of early colonial literature on African cultures comments on the prevalence of laughter and humor within African society. But this is usually to sort of reinforce ideas about African, innocence and primitivity. And this kind of resulted in like a colonial stigma on African laughter, especially within sort of intellectual circles, combined with a bias against laughter that's present in a lot of missionary education. That only began to change in the early to mid 20th centuries in a lot of these circles. At the same time as humor was becoming a much more positively perceived thing in the global north and among Europeans and Americans. But that sort of positive discourse and this idea that laughter could also be, educational or improving or sophisticated also made laughter a very gendered thing. This discourse of sophisticated laughter was also represented as very masculine, especially by these, early African intellectuals in the 20th century. So we've gone through a lot of different ways of thinking about humor and laughter and its meaning in an African context. And that is a heritage that really is important when we think about what it means in a present day, neoliberal or post-colonial context. We also need to talk a little bit about the internet itself. So internet penetration in Africa quintupled to 47% between 2009 and 2022, with the vast majority, about 3/4 of all internet traffic, coming from mobile phones. While sidestepping state media and official censorship, the popularization of social media has fed the creation of discursive spaces like Black Twitter, where Africans from across the continent and the diaspora signify, joke, discuss, and debate the topics of the day. And as in other parts of the world, social media has also supercharged the rise of African content creators like Elsa Majimbo in Kenya, Lasizwe Dambuza in South Africa, become a crucial space for corporate brand promotion. In Nigeria, in particular, comedy skit making is big business. It's the third biggest entertainment industry in Nigeria today, according to Amokeoja 2024, with top comedy influencers making up to $20,000 monthly from digital content. So it's notable that, given all of this momentum behind comedy and skit comedy in particular, only a few studies to date have focused on the phenomenon of gender masquerade in these skits, which is, again, quite a topical focus, given the presence of a lot of laws against cross-dressing, particularly in places like Nigeria and Ghana. The most recent thing that was circulating is the ban on asexual activity that was passed in Niger recently. And so the fact that particularly IAMCR, his social media persona is based around cross-dressing and portraying this maternal figure, I think is notable as part of this broader conversation about gender and gender performance in Africa. We're informed by Judith Butler's gender performativity theory, which builds on Simone de Beauvoir's conception of gender as a social construct rather than an innate predisposition. Motivated by de Beauvoir's famous maxim, one is not born, but rather becomes a woman, Butler argues that gender is not a state of being, but a procedure of becoming that consists of repetitive, stylized acts of socially accepted norms of femininity or masculinity, and other identities in between. And so you have this, obviously there's tremendous literature on cross-dressing and how that also it can both blur distinctions of gender, but then it can also reinforce them, right? Because even in order to, perform motherhood or perform womanhood for these men, you're having to fall back on widely shared or stereotypical representations of what that means. And so it's a very sort of ambivalent and ambiguous space for whether it is an affirmation or a subversion of traditional gender roles. We also want to talk a little bit about neoliberalism. So by neoliberal, we mean a set of new economic policies premised on deregulation, privatization, and increased international trade. It's more than just an economic framework. It is a discursive formation with its own regimes of truth, per Michel Foucault. And basically, it means sort of the infiltration of the market into all kinds of different social areas, focuses on ideals of choice, freedom, personal responsibility, and self-actualization. And in these skits, you see this a lot as a locus of conflict, right, between the sons, as portrayed in these skits, and the mothers, right? One of the recurring themes in these skits is that just as the skits themselves are on social media, the sons are very much entangled in the world of social media, and the mothers are not, right? The mothers stand completely apart. They're clueless about the world of the internet, and they're clueless about, a lot of the trends and a lot of the social ideas that their sons are absorbing and that their sons are sort of struggling to perform themselves. So what we did was we looked at 60 videos, 60 comedy skits. We purposefully selected 12 skits from each creator to look at in greater depth. And then we also looked at the comments that people left on multiple platforms. So on TikTok, on YouTube, and on Facebook for each of these skits. Because I think it is really important to look at these skits across multiple platforms, because the audience for a particular piece of content on Facebook is not going to be the same as the same audience or the same skit on TikTok. So what did we learn? To give you some greater background on the skit makers themselves, and this is where I really wish that I could show my slides, because I do have lots of pictures of the folks in question. In fact, I might try just to give a visual. I might just share my screen, see if this works. Just share this slide. So on the one hand, we have Nonhlanhla Ndlovu, who is Amozisi on social media. And this is him dressed. He performs, again, as this maternal character, but he's also the son. So there's only one person in most of these videos, and he's performing both roles. They are portrayed as, a two-person household, sort of a lower to middle income household in South Africa. Sometimes it shows this apartment complex that they're living in. And as you can see, hopefully if you can see the slide, Amozisi's mother is usually wielding some kind of weapon. So she's holding a wooden spoon in this example. I'll show you another picture, if I can do so, where she's holding a variety of different instruments of abuse. or instruments of punishment, I should say. Let me get that one pulled up here. So she's got here a bunch of extension cords. She's got a pot. She's got, I think, an iron. In a lot of videos, she has an iron. But basically, most of the videos end up, there's some scenario where Mosisi does something wrong and his mother ends up finishing him, which basically means, beating him. And so he lives in more or less constant fear of being beaten by his mother, and for multiple different reasons, right? So, in one of the skits, Mosisi's mother hits him with a spatula for hiding a girl in his room. In another one, he's beaten with a hammer for staying on his phone while his mother does the dishes. In another one, he is beaten for putting sleeping pills in his mother's tea while attempting to steal money from her. And in another one, he is beaten with a broken tile because he took a detour to see his girlfriend at a taxi rank in Johannesburg, where getting mugged is really common. And he had his mother's phone with him and it was stolen. And so he gets beaten for that. That's the basic formula behind Mosisi's sketches. Now I'll show you IAMCR. It is a little bit different. He has more followers, 9 million followers. Again, he plays the maternal figure, so he plays Mama Chinedu. But unlike the Mosisi sketches, he does not play the son who gets beaten. And in the sketches, it's actually, I believe, his real life brother, who is significantly younger, who is on the receiving end of beatings and punishment. So let me just quickly share so that you can see a picture of the brother. This is looking ahead a little bit conceptually, but you can see this is the child who is playing sort of the other side of this dynamic. Mama Chinedu also uses name-calling and insults as a form of punishment. So they're really well known for, Mama Chinedu uses a lot of malapropisms. She has a catchphrase, "I am with you spiritually," but also, mispronounces English words or uses very sort of colorful metaphors. And again, metes out physical punishment on Chinedu, the son. So in both IAMCR and Mosisi's skits, mother's expectations are clear, her punishments are fierce, but also the maternal bond is unbreakable. While the manner of these mothers may be stifling and tyrannical, they also provide a sense of direction that their children would otherwise lack. While contemporary life presents challenges and temptations that may forever prevent Chinedu and Mosisi from becoming the sons that their mothers wish they were, the skits convey an appreciation for the work mothers do, even at their most unhinged. And this is the ambivalence at the heart of all of these sketches. There's again, more or less this formula of the sons transgressing in some way and then basically getting beaten in hilarious and savage ways for it. But even in basically the depiction or the implication of what would be child abuse, right, in certain frameworks, there's also, the idea again that ultimately the mother and child are sharing this unbreakable bond with one another. And that's something that remains consistent even as the other different scenarios and the rising and falling of circumstances in these child's lives changes. There are cases in these sketches where a softer side of motherhood is shown. So, for example, Mosisi and his mother at one point bond over a meal. She beams with pride when Mosisi gets a job and also throws him a birthday party. However, of course, it never lasts, right? Mosisi always ends up getting the short end of the stick, usually as a result of his own actions, ultimately. And this is an interesting thing, especially in the case of the Mosisi, because he's a little bit older, where the thing that really disrupts the kind of traditional or the established dynamic of this very dominant mother and this very sort of fearful, tentative child is Mosisi getting a job, right? In a sketch called When You Finally Get a Job, Mosisi's mother is depicted as a semi-literate woman who is still strong and supportive of her child's success. After Mosisi gets a job, his mother's overall attitude towards him softens, indicating the liberation and relief that will come with impending financial independence. It subverts the mother's role in the home and also redefines the dynamics of the mother-son relationship, giving the latter an edge over the former. IMDK's skits portray African motherhood in a similar fashion, as a delicate balance between authority and care. The softer side of African motherhood is showcased, although it's always tempered by discipline and guidance. In one sketch, Mama Chinedu endearingly rescues her son from kidnappers, but still finds a reason to slap him. In another, when Chinedu moves away from home because he can no longer stand the abuse, his mother apologizes, manipulating him with a cover of Johnny Drill's song How Are You to lure him back. However, when he returns home, she betrays him as she falls back into the same pattern of discipline. When Chinedu is gainfully employed, his mother happily serves him and the hierarchies are reversed, whereas the previous power relations are restored as soon as he loses his job. And this, to us, I think, it's not occurring in a material vacuum, right? Particularly in the Mosisi case, because Mosisi is a young adult in these sketches. Like, the lack of financial independence experienced by these sons is a really, really important and recurring theme, and a point where people in the comments resonate, right? On the one hand, they want to escape from, parental authority, family authority, these forces that are hampering their ability to interact with the world the way they want to. And then on the other hand, they're prevented by doing it because they don't have an independent means of subsistence. They're not able to join the world of formal employment. And so they're kind of stuck. And there is a dynamic that comes from that. A lot of times, this manifests in romantic areas. So, either of the figures, Mosisi or Chinedu, going out and getting girlfriends and then being disciplined because of things that they try to do, with women. And we also see in these skits the construction of quote unquote African parenting and its contrast with sort of more permissive quote unquote Western parenting styles. So in one IMDK skit, which depicts how mothers respond to their children's modern haircuts, the Nigerian mother, Mama Chinedu, carries her child back to the barber shop in a sack to have his tinted hair completely shaved off, while the American mom, who's also in the skit, is accommodating and accepting of the tinted hair. The skits portray the African mother as a fighter against perceived deviant Western influences. Similarly, in another skit, Chinedu is beaten for performing a viral TikTok trend, Tyla's Water Challenge, which is depicted as immoral. In another skit, Mama Chinedu dismisses Chinedu's tiredness by recounting her past hardships, which serve to reinforce generational authority. This category represents how seemingly innocuous acts, or I guess acts that are innocuous to either Mosisi or Chinedu, trigger a disciplinary response. And there's also a dynamic that appears in a lot of these sketches with religion and morality. These women are portrayed, again, as bringers of discipline and as enforcers of a particularly conservative or African approach to fashion, religion, morality, obedience, etc., etc. And that's contrasted, as you see in like the Tyla example, with the fact that these children are being influenced by popular culture, they're being influenced by social media, and they're being influenced by more market-driven or quote-unquote westernized ways of thinking. Finally, we looked at the conversations that were inspired by these skits, and I'm just going to share my screen again. I'm sorry to have to do it in such a ramshackle way, but we're almost finished with this. Because what's, again, really striking about them is that this content reaches across borders. And it also, one can find examples of people who are in both positions. Obviously, given the way that TikTok skews young, a lot of people put themselves in the shoes of the African child, right? They put themselves in the shoes of a Mosisi or a Chinedu. But then you also see, as you can maybe see if you can see this, this quote here at the bottom, that mothers also have commented on these videos. And people debate the merits of, the particular, obviously very, very exaggerated forms of parenting portrayed in the skits. So somebody says, for example, I think this is on an IMDK video, I didn't like the video because a mother shouldn't hit her child like that. But then a lot of people affirm across borders that this is, this is a memory, this is something that resonates with them, whether they're in Nigeria or Haiti, the Caribbean, et cetera, et cetera. And then this quote from someone who identifies as a mother here, as a Nigerian mom that I am to the bone, that's how we roll. Reset your brain with love. So in an atmosphere where people's livelihoods are very precarious and young people's paths to independence are very uncertain, I think there's more happening with this African parent discourse than just, a celebration of child abuse or a celebration of violence against children. I think there is a way to contextualize this stuff that actually introduces really, really important questions about the role of parents and children in African context today, and the ways that young people are processing, let's say, the penetration of the logic of the market or the logic of social media into everyday life. Now, of course, the skits themselves are artifacts of that. And these are influencers who are also at different points receiving money themselves from brand collaborations and stuff like that. But we just find this a really, really interesting and generative site for thinking about um, the the implications of this discourse and the origins of this discourse around African parenting on the internet. And I think that's pretty much all I've got. So I think I'm going to stop sharing now. Again, I apologize for the technical difficulties, but I would love to open it up for questions. And I see Nonhlanhla is also here. So,
Fantastic.
yeah,
Can you hear me, Robin?
I can hear you.
Okay, great. Then technology is working for me today. As always, it was wonderful to hear how everything you do comes from this historical perspective, and the tools and the capacities and everything you've learned from being a historian and training as such has helped you so much in your comedy career, in studying humour in South Africa. I know that firsthand. And I'm not going to lie, always happy to hear a different accent with, shedding views and insights on our country and on our continent. So with that said, I'd love to open the floor open to questions. You can just, put your hand up, and then as always, I'll let you proceed and just put your camera on so we can see you as well, so we don't feel so isolated on the side of the screen. Adrian, I already see you've put your camera on, so you want to ask a question.
You hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, great. Sorry, I'm still formulating my question. Maybe I'll let someone else go first, but I absolutely love the talk. It's so interesting. I will get back to you in 1 minute.
Okay.
Okay, that's fine. Gary, you're first up on my screen. Sorry, Glenn, I'm not sure if you were first, but Gary's hand popped up on my screen first. So Gary, you can go ahead.
Awesome. Thanks, Jenna. Robin, thank you very much for a very informative chat and opening up of things. Do you think it's I mean, I'm struck by the notion that social media has kind of created a safe space for young people to explore this transition that's taking place within society that in the open is unacceptable. So I lived in Iran for a long time, well, not long time, but a short period. And what used to happen there is that the public face was very different to the private face. So what you saw in the public sphere was very different to what happened behind the walls of a house. And so the walls of the houses were always very tall, and you couldn't see in and that kind of stuff. And what would happen there is that you'd have pools and people swimming in bikinis and things like that, whereas dressing very differently outside in the open. And I was wondering if this social media has created the same kind of safe space for particularly sort of African people to explore an area that they would not be able to do publicly.
Yeah, I mean, I think that again, what's interesting is how it, you know, as with cross-dressing itself, like in South Africa, I believe there's actually now quite strict laws on the books surrounding like corporal parental punishment and stuff like that. And so the discourse is always very interesting. I mean, obviously, this is sort of Three Stooges level violence, is kind of the stock and trade of a lot of these skits. Um, and you see people, I mean, you see a real ambivalence towards it, right? You see people, I mean, most people only have the experience of growing up in a particular household or with a particular parent. And so what you see is people kind of comparing notes, and especially across oceans and across national boundaries. And you see people, who are horrified by this stuff. You see people who, um, you know, potentially are able to or are expressing an appreciation that they might not be able to express in certain circles. And then, of course, people, um, surely a lot of people who are, laughing at it, but sort of from a perspective of someone who survived, and doesn't necessarily view it particularly positively. So, I think it's occurring in so many different contexts that it's difficult to characterize it in any particular way. But it's just remarkable how it resonates. And this formula obviously is able to draw these tremendous followings.
Awesome. Thanks, Robin.
Do you have anything you'd like to add, Nonhlanhla?
Thank you, Robin. No, not at this point.
Okay.
And then, okay, I've got Adrian and Glenn. I'm not sure who went first. Who put their hand up first? Glenn, do you want to go? Adrian, is that okay? Thanks so much. Okay, go ahead, Glenn.
All right, thanks so much, Jenna. I hope you guys can hear me. Again, the technical glitches on my side saying cannot start video, so I'll just proceed without that. But Robin, this was beautiful because it's something which we are observing on a daily basis. And being an African myself and following African comedy, and just even more locally here in South Africa, I've been looking at the same sort of comedic videos by so-called colored artists, where there's also the same trope, the cross-dressing. It's quite rampant with the Nigerian artist, as you mentioned, and sometimes they even embed those what would you call that sound effects of Jesus. I'm not sure if you've heard
lots
that.
of sound effects. Yeah, that's a big part.
And they often have one called a disarm. I'm not sure if you've heard that. Disarm. And it comes to this notion of the idea of what you've alluded to as the punishment or the corporal punishment, and how the trope of the mother always is seen as carrying weapons. Sometimes it's not a physical weapon which she's holding in her hand, but it's the manner in which she berates her children verbally. She's just, taking them to a slaughter with her words. But the point I wanted to get at, which I find so fascinating with your work, is what I'm picking up, and I'm calling it the folly of what happens to us. So what we start to see is that this is ultimately also comedy, which is an extension of the African diaspora, because I'm seeing a lot of it with Brazilian videos. You alluded to Haiti, to the Caribbean, and so forth. And this idea of showing the normalcy of being punished or being beaten, or being thrown around, or having super demands placed on you by some authoritarian figure. It's both a mirror on the one hand of ordinary folks in working class, black or colored communities seeing themselves represented, their ordinary daily life. So it's the folly of what happens to us. We see it, that's that mirror. And there's another mirror at play here, the mirror of post-colonialism and about domination and subordination, because one could also read that as what's being acted out ultimately through these tropes is what has happened to Black people historically in history. This idea of having to respond to some irrational figure outside of you who feels they've got ultimate control. Just wanted to hear your thoughts about that reading of the comedy as well. Thanks so much.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many different kind of places to think. I totally you know, I totally agree with what you said. I think that like it's complicated, and so on the one hand, it is seeing like the common experiences across continents and contexts. But I find that equally interesting is how social media is integrated into the worlds of the sons. So, what you had that you maybe didn't necessarily have in such a incredibly acute way before the age of social media is now, again, on your phone, you have access to the global north. You're seeing images of, or not necessarily the global north, but just images of radically different ways of living, right? And people who are, whether they are African or not, or whether they're living in Africa or not, are not subject in a visible way to the domination of some sort of irrational figure. And so, when things like getting punished for participating in a TikTok trend are represented, or, there's a whole Amo video about like rap music, and, he gets beaten because he's listening to too much rap music, right? It's the what everyone is dealing with, which is the ubiquity of these images of lifestyles that are not their own, right? And then when it comes to how that's dealt with by these comedians, on the one hand, everybody wants to do whatever they want with, going and finding girls, or everybody wants to be able to have the freedom to party or to listen to music or whatever. But in those softer moments, I think the thing that we couldn't stop thinking about is in the absence of the state or these, strong institutional pillars of like extended family, obviously the houses and the households in these videos are conspicuous by the absence of any kind of paternal figure, right? In the absence of all of those things, the mother is irrational and violent, but also is kind of all that's there in terms of an unconditional support system, right? Or someone who will always be there no matter what, for good or bad. But there's so many different directions to take that in.
Thanks so much, Robin. Thanks. Great question as always, Glenn. Adrian, you've been so patient. Finally.
Oh, yeah. Well, again, thank you so much for a fantastic talk. I found it really, really interesting. I was just wondering, so it kind of sounds like a form of communal catharsis almost, like acting out these things and people empathizing with it and, the punishment or whatever that may be. But then I was also wondering, this question might be too broad, but I just think it's so fascinating to look at world influences through the eyes of young people in TikTok. Do you see like even subtly across the various TikTok posts or whatever that these creators kind of respond to bigger global trends? Like there might be more of one type of TikTok, and then after some economic downturn or the war in Iran or something. I don't know if there's more coming through there or not, or that's kind of too hard to concern. I just to consider. Yeah.
I mean, I have my own thoughts. I don't know if I think that you do have, I mean, obviously these are people who are aware that they have got global audiences, right? And so, I don't know, and maybe Nonhlanhla can add something here, but in terms of like immediate, I mean, obviously there's pandemic humor that I think is present in both of these folks. I don't know that either of them are responding to the news in particularly specific ways. But, they are like, again, with the water challenge in Tyla. I mean, this is the Nigerian skit maker, and obviously Tyla is South African. And that song was all over the world. So they are responding in that sense um, to all of this stuff. Nonhlanhla, do you have anything to add there?
Good afternoon, everyone. I don't know if my camera is working. Good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, I think in particular, I just wanted to respond to a question that I saw in the chat, which I think is quite relevant to what this question is asking as well. I think there's somebody who was asking about whether do you want to say something? I think she's here. Enzo,
Yes.
do you want
Enzo, unmute yourself.
Okay, and then I can respond to that. Yeah.
I'll just read it and then you can
Okay,
respond.
cool. No problem.
Awesome.
It's
Thank
okay.
you so much.
Okay.
So, in the case with the case studies, right? My understanding is that the mother appears only through the son's body. And of course, because you mentioned de Beauvoir, this notion of the mother is a myth that is authored by others and then handed back to women as their essence. And so, one worry that I have is that this comedy repeats this kind of mythologization. Could you speak to this point? And then also, I was just wondering, because both of the comedians are male, do you find that women doing this work, that it won't circulate in quite the same way?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I just wanted to say, I think that it's mainly because of that neoliberal imperative, the fact that they will definitely pander to those stereotypes. So whether it's male comedians or female comedians, they just have to look at those, use those extreme cases. So that because obviously they are looking for viewership, they have to make money off of the platform that they are sharing these comedies. And I think there's, in particular, there is a Zimbabwean comedian. I'm originally from Zimbabwe. There's a Zimbabwean female comedian who also uses sort of the same script, I can say, in the sense that she will depict that kind of motherhood in those very exaggerated situations that people can relate to, which also brings, I think, which speaks to the point that the previous speaker made about that communal catharsis. And because people can relate, it becomes very popular and it circulates or goes viral very quickly. So I think one, yes, definitely, because the male comedians that are impersonating females, it will go viral. But then even in cases where women themselves doing these skits, they still become very popular as well.
I would also add, when you were talking about that, I was also thinking about Stellenbosch Ndlovu in South Africa. And, she has had a lot of success on TikTok portraying not fathers, but uncles. And so, I do think, I think that absolutely it reinforces, the mother becomes this, cartoonishly exaggerated, larger than life figure. And so in that sense, I think that the critique is really valid from a feminist perspective. But there are like female comedians, comedy creators, who have gotten quite a bit of mileage off of portraying men as well. Whether it's the same level, I don't know, but it is
it's a great answer and a great question, Anzel, as always. Unfortunately, it's that time again where we have to say goodbye, but I want to thank both of you. Fantastic presentation, also very insightful and engaging questions, which was great. And I hope you will all join us next week, Friday, same time. We have Kylie van der Merwe presenting, and her presentation is titled 404 Artwork Not Found. So that should also be quite entertaining for all of us. I don't know, Andrea, if you want to say anything before we all log off.
Just thank you all so much for joining us. It was a very, very informative and wonderful and interesting session, and very excited to kick off our second semester in such a wonderful way. And remember, we will put you up on YouTube. So if you want to relook at your presentation or have a look again or send it off to people, then I'll send you the link. Okay, so yes, thank you all for joining, and have a great weekend.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks so much, everyone.